It started on a humid Atlanta night, 3 years before anyone imagined subpoenas and sworn oaths. Katt Williams was headlining a sold-out theatre, riffing off the top of his head about celebrity excess. Mid-set, he leaned into a sly grin, dropped his voice an octave, and teased, "Some folks throw parties so wild you leave your dignity at coat check, and a certain hip-hop tycoon keeps the claim tickets." The crowd howled. Video clips rocketed across social media by sunrise. That quick jab, barely 40 seconds long, became the bit fans demanded at every stop, ballooning into a running gag about freak-off Fridays and locked studio doors. Backstage, though, the mood wasn't all laughs. According to emails later unearthed by prosecutors, several venue managers received what they called polite but pressing calls from intermediaries tied to Diddy's camp. One booker remembers being asked whether Katt planned to edit the material before the show hit New York. Another swears a sponsorship deal vaporized overnight with a cryptic note, "Bad for business to mock the family." Rumours suggest even Katt's agent got late-night messages warning that the comic was stepping on powerful toes. Katt brushed it off at first, until theatres began sliding out from under him. A Chicago date vanished without explanation. A Los Angeles gig was suddenly double booked. The cancellations cost six figures in a single month and, more importantly, signalled that someone with clout was squeezing the brakes. That's when Katt did what he always does. He took the squeeze and squeezed back, doubling down on the joke and turning the mystery into a headline-grabbing feud. But losing stages was only the first tremor. Behind closed doors, bigger players were already mapping out a silent strategy, and one of them, Joe Rogan claims, tapped his own phone to join the pressure campaign. And what happened when comedy's loudest podcaster collided with hip-hop's most guarded mogul would crank the drama to a whole new pitch. Long before court dates clogged calendars, Joe Rogan picked up the faint buzz of interference on his end. Literally. One night, as he prepped for an episode with a rising MMA star, his producer flagged a string of dropped calls and garbled voicemail alerts. Minutes later, Rogan's direct line rang. The voice on the other end stayed smooth but cold. "Your guest list better steer clear of a certain comedian spraying rumours about the boss." Rogan, no stranger to controversy, shot back, "Since when do punchlines need clearance?" Click. Silence. The threat hung in the studio like stale cigar smoke. Rogan didn't name names on air, but long-time listeners noticed a subtle shift. Episodes that once roasted celebrity excess now tiptoed around anything involving Diddy. Behind the scenes, Rogan traced the call to a disposable phone registered under a shell company tied, through two hops, to Combs Enterprises. To Rogan, it felt less like coincidence and more like a velvet glove warning. Katt, meanwhile, caught wind of Rogan's static and dialed him up. Their conversation, later summarised in court filings, reads like a thriller. Rogan relaying cryptic messages, Katt laughing it off at first, then pausing when Rogan mentioned the phrase, "freeze the funny man out." The possibility of a coordinated blackout suddenly felt real. Fuel spilled on dry leaves. Katt took the stage in Miami the next week and opened with, "They say I should stick to safe jokes. Funny. Safety seems to cost about as much as a beachfront condo in Malibu." The crowd roared. Social feeds exploded again. And somewhere in Manhattan, legal teams started drafting strategy memos. That's when booking agents stopped returning calls altogether and Katt's tour bus sat idle for the first time in a decade. Bills stacked, venues balked, and the spectre of an industry gatekeeper flexing unseen leverage took centre stage. Katt realised he'd need more than punchlines. He'd need a spotlight powerful enough to expose every backstage manoeuvre. But the next piece of that spotlight wouldn't come from comedy at all. It arrived in the form of a quietly opened federal investigation into witness intimidation, a probe that soon wrapped both Katt and Rogan in its net. Months passed with tour posters gathering dust, but the real script flipped when Katt Williams found a thick envelope wedged beneath his front gate. Inside, a subpoena stamped with the Department of Justice seal. Prosecutors, it turned out, were piecing together a wider intimidation puzzle, one that stretched from late-night phone threats to mysteriously empty arenas. According to court insiders, investigators had combed ticket sales spreadsheets, call logs, and hotel ledgers, tracing a breadcrumb trail of coincidences leading back to associates loosely orbiting Diddy's empire. Katt's first instinct was to laugh. "You're really bringing a comedian into a federal probe." But the paperwork made its intention clear: testify or face contempt. Buried in the legalese sat a list of names he recognised: venue managers who once raved about his draw, agents who'd suddenly ghosted, even a sound engineer who claimed he'd been offered consulting fees to cancel a show at the last minute. The scope hinted at more than pettiness. It suggested a systematic chokehold on anyone poking fun at the mogul's after-hours reputation. Prosecutors wanted Katt not for punchlines but for proof. They needed his first-hand account of abrupt cancellations, the suspicious calls he'd logged, the sponsors who cooled overnight. When Katt told them about Rogan's warning, the investigators' eyes reportedly lit up like spotlights, sensing a pattern bigger than comedy beef. And Rogan, already on record, had preserved every cryptic voicemail. Still, stepping onto the witness stand risked painting an even larger target on Katt's back. Friends urged caution, lawyers talked protection orders. But the comic who once joked that fear is a venue too small for my jokes chose a different path. He leaned in. If someone had tried to cancel his voice, he'd use that very voice under oath to amplify the story. The subpoena was just paper, yet it unlocked a stage far larger than any sold-out theatre. A federal courtroom, microphones off, truth front and centre. And as preparations began, word leaked that Diddy's legal team was scrambling, not only to counter Katt's testimony, but to keep new allegations from spilling into public view. Because tucked in those files was a timeline of late-night meetings and rumoured payoffs, and prosecutors were ready to ask how far a music mogul would go to guard a carefully crafted image. But Katt wasn't the only entertainer in the docket spotlight. A once friendly fellow comic, one who'd shared green rooms and late dinners with Diddy, was about to reveal a story the defence never saw coming. Word spread fast that Katt wouldn't be the only funny man facing the jury box. Enter Marcus "Mac" Andrews, a touring veteran who'd once swapped jokes and late-night wings with Diddy at VIP lounges from Miami to Vegas. Mac had stayed quiet for years, but prosecutors unearthed an unfiled complaint showing he'd lost a streaming special after refusing what he called creative suggestions from the mogul's inner circle. Reports claim those suggestions included dropping an entire 5-minute riff about celebrity midnight auditions, a bit audiences loved because it nodded, none too subtly, toward Diddy's rumoured soirees. Mac arrived in court clutching a slim folder of emails and voicemail transcripts. One message, dated the morning after his LA set, read, "Funny routine, Mac. Let's keep industry talk in the green room. Don't make us clean up on aisle comedian." Another, flagged urgent, offered a lucrative private gig if he'd retire that particular joke indefinitely. Mac refused, and within weeks he says theatres started rearranging their calendars. Pieces of his tour fell like dominoes: Denver, Seattle, then Detroit, mirroring Katt's sudden wipeout. The courtroom hushed when Mac described a backstage encounter in Vegas. Diddy, flanked by 2 aides, allegedly leaned in and murmured, "Laughter is currency, but I control the bank." Mac swore he laughed it off that night, thinking it bravado. Only later, watching his bookings crater, did the line feel like a promise kept. Katt listened intently, his trademark smirk nowhere in sight. With Mac's testimony, prosecutors began sketching a pattern. Comics mocked the mogul, phone calls flew, gigs evaporated. The jury's eyes flitted between Katt and Mac, measuring echoes in their stories. Yet the shock factor was only climbing. Because buried in Mac's folder sat a hotel ledger tying a midnight meeting to an unexpected name, a television host whose influence dwarfs even late-night ratings. And when that host's involvement surfaced, the case lurched from celebrity scuffle to full-blown power saga. When prosecutors projected that Vegas hotel ledger onto the courtroom screen, a wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. There, under a column labelled private penthouse guests, July 22nd, sat a name no one predicted. Shaw L. Insiders quickly matched the initials to Leighton Shaw, late-night television's ratings king and a long-time fixture on Diddy's party circuit. Shaw wasn't on trial, but his unexpected cameo jolted the narrative out of music industry squabbling and into primetime intrigue. Rumours suggest Shaw arrived bearing notes from network executives worried that Diddy's spiralling headlines could tank advertiser confidence. If those whispers proved true, it would show pressure rippling from record labels to television desks, tightening the vise on any comic refusing to self-censor. Defence attorneys objected, claiming hearsay, but the judge allowed Mac's first-hand observations to stand. The implication was clear. Diddy's reach extended to boardrooms where a single phone call could reroute a national tour. Katt watched, stone still, as the jury digested the ledger. For years he'd joked that doors close faster in Hollywood than they open, yet seeing a printed proof of who might be swinging those doors was a gut punch even he couldn't mask. The prosecution rested the exhibit with one final line. This wasn't random. It was choreography. The bailiff barely finished swearing him in before Katt Williams leaned toward the microphone, voice steady, eyes locked on the jury. He opened with a punchline. Funny how truth sells out faster than any arena. Then slid 3 thumb drives across the witness table. Inside, he said, lived every late-night call that turned his world upside down. Prosecutors clicked play. The first recording crackled, then a silky baritone rode the static. That joke ends tonight, little man. Tours get cancelled, careers get quiet. The gallery gasped. Katt confirmed the caller ID matched a number traced to a concierge account at one of Diddy's New York condos. Another clip featured a different voice offering what Katt called hush money dressed up as sponsorship. Accept the cash, the message suggested, and step away from the freak-off fantasy. When Katt asked the jury, would you censor your craft for a check? Murmurs rippled through the benches. Next came the receipts. Emails from theatre chains voiding contracts due to unforeseen conflicts, invoices for promo ads pulled hours before airtime, a spreadsheet tallying nearly $2 million in lost ticket sales. Katt broke it down, each red number linked to a date when he'd roasted Diddy on stage. Correlation isn't always causation, he conceded with a shrug, but dang if they don't dance in perfect sync. Then he shifted from finances to fear. He told the courtroom about a young opener who vanished from the lineup after posting a single backstage selfie captioned, "Bad boy punchlines incoming." Rumours suggest the comic received a cease and desist letter hours later. Katt's lawyers displayed a blurred copy, the signature block pointing to Combs Entertainment legal affairs. Katt's voice dipped. They didn't just try to silence me, they tried to erase anyone warming up the mic. Finally, he circled back to Joe Rogan. He described a 3-way call, speakerphone hissing, where Rogan promised to air the story on his podcast if venues kept stonewalling. According to Katt, that pledge was the lifeline that convinced him to testify. Comedy isn't dangerous, he told the jurors, until somebody rich decides laughing is a crime. The room sat frozen as the last voicemail faded, and Diddy's lead attorney rose, buttoning his jacket, ready to turn cross-examination into a slugfest no comedy club could contain. Diddy's lead attorney, Victor Holden, strode to the lectern like a man setting up his own stage. His plan was obvious: paint Katt as a headline hunting agitator who spun tall tales for ticket sales. Holden waved a decade-old tabloid clipping about Katt's traffic stop, pounced on rumours of backstage scuffles, and finally sneered, "Isn't controversy just part of your act, Mr. Williams?" Katt never flinched. He folded his arms, tilted his head, and fired back with timing honed over 20 years on the road. "Sir, controversy is part of life. Jokes are how I send the bill." Laughter flickered from the gallery, quickly hushed by the judge, but the tone had shifted. Holden pressed harder, insisting no direct proof tied Diddy to any threat. That's when Katt uncapped another bottle of receipts. He described a 2018 awards show rehearsal where an up-and-coming comic, He wouldn't reveal the name on record, tried testing a mild riff about late-night pool parties at Casa Combs. Katt said Diddy glided onto the empty stage mid-sound check, arm draped around the comic's shoulders, and whispered, "You're talented, don't waste it on rumours." Moments later, the show's producer allegedly scrapped the joke, citing sponsor sensitivities. Katt added, "I watched that kid's smile shrink 3 sizes before lunch." Holden objected, hearsay, speculation, but the judge allowed the anecdote to stand as Katt's personal observation. Then came a text thread projected for the jury, the unnamed comic messaging Katt days later. "Bro, they're on me. I can't touch that bit. You might want to chill too." Katt highlighted the reply he'd sent back. "Silence ain't comedy. Do you?" The courtroom felt electric. Each new detail chipped at the defence's claim of coincidence, hinting at a culture of whispered pressure that stretched far beyond Katt's cancelled tour. Holden shuffled papers, searching for steadier ground, but the jury's eyes were glued to the screen of messages, evidence that fear had spread like a backstage rumour no one dared repeat aloud. Yet the real shock lay ahead. Prosecutors signalled they had one final witness ready to confirm the pattern, and this time the person carried both industry clout and first-hand documentation no cross-exam could spin away. All eyes swivelled as Cheryl C.J. Davenport, legendary tour promoter and founder of Spotlight Live events, took the stand. CJ has booked everyone from stadium rockers to viral stand-ups, and her reputation for blunt honesty precedes her. She began by explaining she'd stayed silent for months because the comedy world is small, but the rumour mill is enormous. What finally pushed her forward, she said, was watching venue after venue back out of Katt's dates, while the same rooms magically opened for artists linked to one man, Sean Combs. CJ produced a folder thick with signed venue agreements, cancellation notices, and last-minute scheduling memos. Each sheet bore identical language, logistical conflicts, unforeseen brand concerns. But CJ pointed out the timing. Every cancellation landed within 48 hours of a Katt Williams set that joked about Diddy's after-hours life. On 3 occasions, she added, replacement acts were bankrolled by labels under the Bad Boy umbrella. "Patterns don't lie," CJ told the jury. "Somebody was swapping out tickets like chess pieces." The most striking exhibit was a chain of emails between CJ and a major Midwest arena. After confirming Katt's date, the venue manager wrote, "Heads up, getting pressure from Big Boss in NYC about content issues. Might have to rethink." Minutes later, a forwarded message appeared showing Diddy's longtime business lieutenant flagging brand risk if the show went forward. 2 days later, the date vanished from the calendar. Defense counsel argued the lieutenant's note was merely standard sponsor vetting, but CJ's rebuttal hit hard. "I've vetted shows for 25 years. Nobody blacklists an entire tour over one joke unless someone powerful says so." She concluded with a simple line that echoed through the hushed room. "Jokes should spark laughter, not lock doors." With CJ's paper trail laid bare, prosecutors rested their witness list. The narrative was now crystal. Comedians cracked wise, invisible gears turned, mics went dark. As the judge ordered a recess before closing arguments, jurors filed out clutching binders stuffed with voicemails, ledgers, and cancellation contracts, each page a piece of a puzzle pointing back to Diddy's empire. And when court resumed, everyone knew the final act was near, where verdicts slam shut louder than any punchline. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.